Welcome into Feeling Good Feels Good. I am your host, Dr. Tripp. This is the podcast where we take nutritional and medical advice that feels complicated and turn it super simple. We also take simple, everyday items and find the wonder and benefit in these things that may be taken for granted or overlooked. The goal is simple. Feeling good should feel good and feel easy. We believe that everyone can feel good and deserves to feel good. Today, we're talking about a nutritional topic, one of the oldest foods in human history. I should say one of the oldest human created foods in history, and perhaps the most important food in all of human history. It's hard to go into any grocery store, restaurant, or anywhere that sells or serves food and not find this item. It is universal across all countries and all cultures. Though it may look a little different depending where it's coming from, this item is used everywhere and has been used for thousands of years. If you haven't guessed it yet, by looking at our background today, it's bread. Bread shows up everywhere, whether it's sourdough in the grocery store, muffins in the bakery, pita in the Middle East, tortillas in Mexico, or anywhere else. You might see different grains, different techniques, used in different ways across cultures, but it's the same basic idea. Today we're going to talk about what is bread technically, why humans have thrived on bread, and why it's been around for over 2,000 years, the history of how we got here today, what bread actually does in our body, how humans benefit from it, the different bread types, so you can know when to eat which style for your particular goal. We'll touch on gluten, celiac disease, low-carb diets, as well as other myths and facts. I'll even give you a few hacks on how you can use bread to benefit your health that you may not have heard of, and how I use bread in my diet and in my practice. So with all of that, let's dive in.
Welcome to Feeling Good Feels Good with Dr. Tripp.
Welcome to a state of feeling good. It's how we live and how you could. Just know it's how we're all meant to be. If things are off, listen to your body. It can tell us exactly what we need. Physical, emotional, nutritional, or mentally. No need to worry, it's reached accessibly. No matter how you felt or what you've heard, well-being's for everyone, it's what you deserve. Ease and joy are yours once it's understood. No need to fear, because feeling good feels good.
The information in this podcast is intended for educational and informational purposes only. It is not medical advice and should not be interpreted as a diagnosis, treatment, or prescription. Listening to this podcast does not establish a doctor-patient relationship. Always consult your own healthcare providers before making any changes to your health, medications, or treatment plans. The opinions shared here are based on clinical experience, research, and professional knowledge, but they may not apply to any specific situations. By listening to this podcast, you acknowledge and agree to these terms.
Welcome back. Today we have a tasty, toasty episode for you. And before we get too deep into it, let's start with the basics. What are we talking about? What is bread? From a food science perspective, it's actually super simple. At its core, bread is a baked food made from just a couple simple key ingredients: milled grain and water. Yes, it's just that, grain and water. The milled grain, most common, is what we call flour. And sometimes there are leavening agents that are added and other unique ingredients. But when you break it down, bread is simple. It's just grain and water baked together. In fact, some of the oldest breads in human history were just that: flour and water. And that's all. So now that we have that super complicated recipe behind us, let's talk about the different categories of bread. There are unleavened breads. Think about breads that don't rise. This would be because they don't contain yeast or go through fermentation. Think about tortillas in Mexican culture, matzah in Jewish cultures, or roti in India. These breads stay flat, they cook super quickly, and have been staples of the human diet for thousands of years. Then there are leavened breads, which use gas bubbles to create light, airy texture. This is the texture that most people think about when they think of a loaf of bread. These include yeast breads, slow fermented sourdoughs, and enriched breads that might include eggs, milk, or butter. You can also categorize these simply by flatbreads or loaf breads. Technically, breads sit on a boundary between several other foods. Bread, cake, pastry, and even pasta all start from the same simple foundation, grain and water. The difference is really just the ratios, the fat, the sugar, and how the dough itself is handled. Add more sugar and fat, and suddenly the bread becomes cake. Layer in butter and a little extra technique, suddenly it becomes a pastry. Skip the baking and boiling entirely, and then you have raw pasta, which means bread isn't just a food. It became a foundational technology, one simple combination of grain and water that humans have thrived on and adapted into hundreds of different foods across cultures and all of human history. Archaeologists have found grinding stones at ancient sites dating back nearly 20,000 years. These stones were used to crush wild grass into flour, which could then be mixed with water and cooked over fire. In other words, humans were experimenting with bread thousands of years before we even planted the first farm. And that's where the bread story gets really interesting. Many anthropologists believe that the desire to produce reliable grain foods, aka bread, is what drove the development of agriculture itself. So not only did bread help make bread, it also pushed humans to learn how to farm. So in many ways, bread didn't just feed civilization early on, it helped create it. As cultures developed, bread became deeply integrated into regional identity and daily life. Ancient Egyptian bakers are the ones who discovered fermentation. It's kind of crazy and coincidental how it happened. Wild yeast in the air began to interact with the dough, which created the earliest forms of sourdough bread known to humankind. Egyptian bakeries actually became incredibly sophisticated at a very early stage, producing dozens of varieties of loaved bread. Romans took it even further, and bread became a cornerstone of the empire's food system. The government distributed grain and eventually bread itself to the citizens as a part of public welfare. Maintaining a stable bread supply was considered essential for political stability. Fast forward to today, and grocery prices and bread prices are still seen as a sign of political and governmental stability or lack thereof. Across the Middle East, soft pocket breads like pitas became a cultural staple. In India, roti and naan breads evolved alongside the development of the clay oven. In Mexico and Central America, maize was ground and cooked into tortillas, and bread was made not from wheat but from corn. Different grains, different techniques, but it's not hard to see how useful and essential humans found this recipe. Wherever humans settled, they found a way to turn grains into bread. Bread also became deeply symbolic in many religions. Bread represented life, nourishment, and community. In Christian traditions, eating a piece of bread is a central role in taking communion, symbolizing sustenance and shared humanity. Think about the phrase breaking bread. For thousands of years, the act of breaking bread together meant trust, hospitality, and belonging, which is all extremely remarkable when you think about it. One of the most powerful cultural, food, political, and religious symbols in human history began with something so simple. Grains ground into flour, mixed with water, and cooked over fire. Pretty cool. So let's shift our focus and zoom in to the nutrition and the science of bread, because bread is very often misunderstood. Bread is primarily made of carbohydrates, but that word, carbohydrates or carbs, gets thrown around a lot without really taking into account what a carbohydrate actually is and what it actually does. From a chemistry standpoint, carbohydrates are simply molecules made of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. And that's where the name comes from, carbon plus water. Think about what we just talked about, flour, grain, plus water. Now within that category, there are three main types of carbohydrates. We have sugars. These are the simplest carbohydrates, which are small molecules that we absorb very quickly. Second, we have starches. These are more complex carbohydrates made from long chains of molecules. These digest a little slower because your digestive system has to break down these long chains before the glucose can enter your blood, aka before the sugar gets into your bloodstream. Third is fiber. Technically, still a carbohydrate, but it behaves a little differently. We don't have the enzymes to fully break down these fibers, which means they travel through the digestive system and actually feed your gut bacteria. And we want that. We want healthy bacteria in our gut fed by prebiotic foods and fibers. So where does bread fit in? Bread is actually the second. It's a starch. Well, traditionally, most bread is comprised of starch. Inside the grain, there are two main structures. One of them is more like a long chain, while the other is more like a tree structure with many branching offshoots. So just think of those images, a long chain and a branching tree. When you eat bread, your digestive system begins to break down these molecules, and it starts right away. The enzymes in your saliva in your mouth are where the process starts, immediately beginning to break down these long chain molecules. As digestion continues in the small intestine, those chains are slowly converted into glucose. The glucose then enters the blood and becomes one of the body's primary fuel sources. Your cells take that glucose and turn it into something called ATP, which is essentially the energy currency that powers every single thing that your body does. You did hear me say the word currency, and the metaphor between ATP and money is not all that far off. If you have more ATP, your body can do more things. If you run out of money, you can't keep buying things or keep shopping. You're done for the day, just like your body is done when ATP is low. Your brain relies heavily on glucose. Your muscles use it during movement and exercise. Your nervous system even relies on it to transmit signals. So carbohydrates, including those from bread or healthy bread, we'll get into that later, play a central role in human metabolism. And here's an important piece to the puzzle. You probably already knew this, but not all breads affect the body in the same way. Before we get into the different types of breads, I want to just give you a little further information and context on why humans still thrive on bread today and our ancestors thrived on bread thousands of years ago. Bread can help with gut health. Whole grains and fermentation feed our microbiome. Bread is energy dense. For much of human history, survival depended on having reliable sources of energy. Bread provided exactly that. Think about when you're low on energy. How often are you craving a sandwich or a piece of bread? For some of you, that may be your most frequent craving. Bread is also portable. Before refrigeration, when most food spoiled quickly, grains could be dried, stored, transported, and turned into bread readily whenever needed. In many ways, bread was an early form of food technology. Raw grains are not readily digestible, so having a way to digest these grains was crucial. And these types of carbohydrates stimulate hormones that signal the brain that food has been consumed. So this allows you to feel satiated and focus on whatever task needs to get done and stop thinking about those hunger cravings. Have you ever thought, I just need a sandwich, and then after you eat it, you can get back to work? You've literally stimulated hormones that tell your brain, I have eaten, I'm good. Combine it with fiber and protein from other foods in the meal, and it becomes extremely satiating. This allowed early humans to have time to focus on development and community rather than just survival and hunger all the time. So let's talk about these types of bread. One of the most popular, extremely popular, and still growing in popularity is the bread type that we talked about earlier that we can thank the ancient Egyptian bakers for. It's sourdough. One of the most important things to understand is whether you're eating a whole grain or a refined grain. When grain like wheat is harvested, it naturally comes in three parts. The bran, which is the outer layer, this part is rich in fiber and many antioxidants. The germ is the nutrient-dense core of the grain. It contains healthy fats, B vitamins, vitamin E, and other important minerals. And the endosperm, which is the starchy middle portion that provides most of the grain's carbohydrate energy. When bread is labeled whole wheat or whole grain, it means that it contains all three parts. When grains are refined to make white flour, the bran and the germ are removed. So all that's left is the starchy endosperm. So you get a burst of the energy from the carbohydrate, but you lose the fiber, the minerals and the vitamins that support metabolic health, that support slow digestion, stabilize blood sugar, feeding beneficial gut bacteria, and keeping people fueled for longer times. So the refined sugar gives you a quick burst of energy and then likely a crash, where the whole wheat or whole fiber allows you to retain all of the amazing benefits from bread. Many processed breads, unfortunately, take it even further, and they add ingredients like high fructose corn syrup or partially hydrogenated oils, emulsifiers, and preservatives. While these ingredients may help extend shelf life, they are not meant for our body to consume, and eating consistently or in high levels can lead to dysfunction and even health side effects. We'll have future episodes on reading labels and how to identify these harmful additives. But for now, the main ones I want you to look for are high fructose corn syrup and hydrogenated oils. If you can avoid emulsifiers and preservatives, even better. Now let's get to the fermentation and the sourdough. Instead of adding yeast alone, sourdough is fermented by a living culture of wild yeast and lactic acid bacteria. These actually naturally exist in the environment. Think about how sourdough came to be with the Egyptian bakers. Wild yeast in the air just began to act with the dough on itself, which when you think about it is pretty crazy. Sourdough came from dough interacting with yeast in the air and almost created itself for us to eat. So when water and flour are mixed in and allowed to ferment over time, these microbes begin breaking down part of the grain. This process has several very interesting nutritional benefits. First, the fermentation partially breaks down the gluten, making it easier to digest for some people over conventional breads. Second, the bacteria produce organic acids that slow the rate at which carbohydrates are absorbed, often resulting in a lower glycemic response, meaning less fluctuations of spikes and crashes in your blood sugar. Third, fermentation unlocks even more minerals in the grain, things like iron, zinc, and magnesium. This is done by reducing compounds that normally are bound to those nutrients. The fermentation frees them up and makes them more bioavailable for us. And finally, what sourdough is probably most famous for are the organic acids and the microbial byproducts that support gut health and digestion. This is what people are talking about when they talk about the probiotics found in sourdough bread made available through fermentation. And what's even more interesting about sourdough, before the introduction of commercial yeast and marketing around bread and bread types, sourdough was the most common and dominant form of bread in human history. So it's great to see people learning about the benefits of this form of bread and getting it back into our everyday diets. So why do you think that when you go to a restaurant, the first thing that they give you is bread? This is not an accident. Remember when we talked about the hormones that are released when you eat bread that make you feel full? Well, when you introduce bread first, your body is going to release a small amount of insulin, which move amino acids and can stimulate tryptophan and serotonin, the neurotransmitters associated with relaxation and satisfaction. Bread also primes the digestive system. Saliva enzymes start breaking down starches, and the body begins preparing for the rest of the meal. So giving bread isn't just an accident. It reduces the perceived wait time, or at least the discomfort with the perceived wait time. It also primes the digestive system to be ready to eat a lot of food and to overall be more satisfied with the meal and feel more satisfied leaving. So that simple basket of bread that you get at the restaurant isn't just a snack. It's a purposeful part of the experience backed by neuroscience and physiology. Of course, there are some people who struggle with bread due to celiac disease or gluten sensitivity. In celiac disease, eating gluten can damage the small intestine, leading to malabsorption, inflammation, and other digestive issues. It can even sometimes trigger neurological symptoms, things like hyperirritability, hyperreflexes, or numbness or tingling in the hands and feet. For people with non-celiac gluten sensitivity, which is less well understood than pure celiac disease, the symptoms may be similar. They may also include fatigue and brain fog. One of the most common ways that I see this manifest in people is with leaky gut, gut permeability issues, or a microbiome that's out of balance. Through gut testing, healing leaky gut, and restoring balance to the microbiome, some people will retain or regain the ability to eat bread that contains gluten to some degree. For most people, gluten isn't harmful. It can actually be helpful. It provides protein, slows the digestion so that you get long-term energy, not spikes and crashes, and can increase the feeling of feeling full so that you don't have cravings later. If you think you may have a gluten sensitivity and testing is not available to you, really, elimination diet is probably your best bet. Although it won't be fun, it can help you get more information about why you feel the way that you do. Before I leave, I want to give 2 quick tips on bread. While I don't buy every single food item organic, I do believe that it is important to buy wheat that is organic. It is one of the most common foods to be sprayed with harmful pesticides like glyphosate. The quality of the wheat can also be far less in non-organic wheats. So to avoid the damage to your endocrine system and to your gut that comes from glyphosate, and to retain the benefits of everything we just talked about, I do recommend buying wheat that is organic certified. And one of the things that I think bread is overlooked for is actually sleep. If you have whole wheat at the end of your day in some form, like avocado toast, toast and butter, or some complex carb in bread form, it can actually keep your blood sugar stable throughout the course of the night so that you don't wake up wide awake at 3 a.m. and have an easier time getting rest. So I hope you all feel excited to go to the grocery store or the restaurant, or even utilizing what's already in your kitchen cabinet, and you can enjoy your bread a little bit more, knowing the amazing benefits and history behind it. I can't wait to see you all next time on the next episode of Feeling Good Feels Good.